Welcome to Actionable Intelligence. I'm Eric Greitens, and as we've said before, this is the show that respects your intelligence. We honor you as a citizen, and we bring you evidence. We're willing to cover the facts that the mainstream media is simply not willing to report. Well, folks, the guys at the Gateway Pundit, Jim and Joe Hoft, have been breaking stories left and right. They've been tracking down these election irregularities, and the president himself has been actually tweeting some of their findings. Joining us today to talk about what they found and how they found it is Joe Hoft with the Gateway Pundit. Joe, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's an honor. It's great to be here.
So Joe, please just take our viewers back to the day of the election. What did you see, and then what did you and your team start to find that night and in the week following the election?
Yeah, great question. Well, I think like most Americans, and maybe you even felt this as well, we kind of knew something was going to happen. I think everybody did. We felt like Trump was going to really do well. But we also felt like probably something was going to happen. This thing wouldn't be finalized for a couple weeks. And here we are now, a couple weeks later, and it's not finalized. So we didn't know how that was going to work, but there were certainly some thoughts that might happen. One piece that we had that gave us a lot of security in believing that Trump was going to really run away with this election was related to some work that I did before the election, which is I started measuring number of people at Trump rallies versus number of people at Biden rallies.
Right.
And we found 1.1 million people between Labor Day and Election Day at Trump rallies. Wow. They were massive. 58,000 in one event outside of Pittsburgh. Massive rallies. Biden, on the other hand, after the 2-month period or so, less than 2,000 people.
Oh my gosh, 1.1 million to 2,000.
Yeah. So the disparity, being a numbers guy, I've got a background in as a CPA and other things. That's just gives you a lot of comfort that your candidate's doing pretty well. You know. So we knew that going in. We knew these polls were fake, like they were 4 years ago, maybe even more so this year. But we knew Trump was doing great. People loved that guy. Nobody we knew of fell off the Trump train. People were jumping on the Trump train. We got people in our lives, Jim and I, some sisters jumped on it. You know, they were for Bernie. And when Bernie got it stolen, they couldn't stand Hillary, and they ended up jumping on the Trump train. And they, like so many people, looked at Trump as just really I'll call it the savior, somebody that could save this country, that was finally thinking about that person that hasn't been thought about before, the American citizen. And so we knew going in it was going to be good, but then the election comes and we see immediately the plans, and we saw it beforehand too. Google, Facebook, the big tech companies told us they were going to really basically strangle information. They're not going to allow anybody to say Trump won. They're not going to be able to talk about anything like that else. Only the information they were going to approve was going to be allowed on their sites. Google was going to reject certain queries. You're going to have to really struggle to find the information you want, and we're seeing that today. And in addition to that,
let's just remind, a lot of our viewers saw in the days leading up to the election, they purposefully censored stories about Hunter Biden and Vice President Biden, and they admitted that they censored those stories, and they forecast that they were going to engage in censorship. I'm sorry, go ahead, Joe.
No, thanks, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because we had some exclusive information we'd gotten on Hunter Biden that we put up that showed just terrible behavior on part of Hunter. And I'll just say this: he's like a drug addict who has no problems because he's protected and has more money than he needs. And when you mix those three things together, it creates an animal. And that's basically behind the scenes what we saw with Hunter. We posted that stuff, and it was that was targeted by the big tech.
Sure. But go ahead. You're talking about what was happening on Election Day.
Yeah. So then Election Day comes. We see that they never put Trump ahead in the entire evening. They always were saying Biden's ahead, even though Texas comes in with 6% Trump, Florida with 3.5%, and they hesitated on calling all these states for Trump. throughout the evening. But really, by the time we went to bed around 3 in the morning, we're really disgusted with the news, the way they've been reporting, bragging up Biden, discounting Trump and his efforts. And but we still saw Wisconsin, Michigan, Georgia, Trump way up in all these states. So there was a lot of comfort that things were going to be, Trump just needed Pennsylvania, Michigan, and he was up in Pennsylvania by 700,000 votes. He's up in Michigan by 100,000 or more, up in Wisconsin by 100,000 or more, and up in Georgia by 100,000 more.
Yeah, I think Pennsylvania was like 2.9 million to 2.2 million or something like that. It was a massive lead in the early morning hours. So go ahead, Joe. Yeah.
So anyways, we saw that. We go to bed, we wake up, and we see what the heck happened in Wisconsin and Michigan. Big data dumps overnight. We could see it. Some people even graphed it out, charted it, already by 10 o'clock in the morning. So we saw what's going on. This is not right. And then the media continued with their pro-Biden approach to the news, and nobody could really share much on the mainstream. So that's where we really came in at Gateway Pundit. We started reporting the truth from the go. And here's our observation. Here's what's going on. Here's what really happened in Wisconsin. It's not like Biden slowly crept up. No, there was 100,000 some plus vote drop in the middle of the night that put him ahead. Same thing in Michigan. And so those were our initial observations. So as time goes on, and maybe right at the very beginning there, we started to look at really what we call the voter fraud. Instances where people could not get into various counting facilities. Republicans were not allowed in to help with the account, which was against the law. We saw that in Detroit and Philadelphia. We saw Jim had a really good friend who's in Detroit, got called to go down there the morning after the election to facilitate in that review. She goes in the room. She tells this story how there's a couple counters, a Democrat at each table, and not even at every table was a Republican. And then there was these two other people that were there. She said they looked like Black Lives Matter. And the whole time she stood there, they're harassing her, telling her, adjust your mask, you're too close, things like that, all day long. And real challenging for everybody there. Whenever somebody had enough of it, there'd be an argument. The police would come and escort the Republican out of the room. So a lot of irregularities like that. This unbelievable things were happening, like in Philadelphia.
And let's just mention, Joe, that that's not, you're telling one story there, but all of our viewers know there are literally hundreds of affidavits from around the country that have come in of people providing sworn testimony alleging the same kind of behavior, interference with election observers. I just wanted to make that point as you go on.
And that's an excellent point. And actually, Sidney Powell said the other day, the information's coming in like it's coming in from what you call it, a
fire
feed.
hose. Yeah.
Fire hose. That was it.
Yeah.
Just so much coming at her. And they've got, I think she said the other day, she almost estimated maybe up to 1 million of these letters like that, people that have felt they were cheated in some way. So that happened all over the country. And then we also had the mail-in ballot situation. So we saw this, and I used to be an auditor for years, and one thing that you learn in auditing is you can do a lot of good work in a certain area, but if you're in the wrong area, then it's not really worth much. You need to really focus on that area that's the highest risk. And so that's the approach. So you spend a little time taking a look at your picture before you decide where to go. And if things shift, you jumped over to that. You'd be able to adjust on the spot. So as we were seeing all this voter fraud and a lot of it's being reported, we're thinking, yeah, this is big. This is really big. There's a lot of stuff going on, but there must be something more. At that point, we were introduced to a group of IT guys that had gotten together and decided to start looking at the data. And they shared with us basically their approach, which was they were going to start looking at dead people that were voting. And obviously, you can't vote if you're dead, right? A little hard to do.
Should be hard to do, though apparently it was a lot easier in 2020. But go ahead, Joe. Yeah,
that's right. People are saying you should put it in your will which party you want to vote for after you die, right?
Go ahead.
So anyways, we thought, well, that's a great approach, and you're going to find various things like that. But boy, the steal is really big. There must be something more. There must be something more to this, and that kind of led into our discussion, Jim and I. There's something more here. It's not just that. And so, what really started this off then was.
And if I could, just before we leave that point, I think it's important to remind our viewers. We've had a lot of investigators who've gone out, and they've actually come back and told us, just to prove one dead voter takes a tremendous amount of legwork. And what we're talking about here, what you guys are uncovering is fraud on the scale of tens of thousands of votes. So we know that there were dead voters. You and your team, though, dug in and you started looking at these big movements, these big dumps of votes. Go ahead, Joe.
That's right, Eric. And so what happened next was, again, we're just reporting on this in reaction to the things that are coming up, a lot of the voter fraud. But then we did a report on Michigan. In a county, it was discovered that 6,000 votes were switched from Trump to Biden. And they called it a glitch. And we reported on that. Then the next day we found out about another glitch in Michigan, this time at a lower level, where a guy thought he'd lost his race and then found out, no, there was a glitch. He had actually won his race. And then maybe in the next day or two, we started seeing other things where, like on CNN, they'd report the numbers for Trump at 1 minute. Here's the Trump-Biden race and what their numbers are. And then people observed, hey, look at this. When they come back and show the numbers again, Trump is down by a certain amount and Biden's up by the same amount. So they're like, what's going on here? So that was one instance, but then we got two, and then we got three. We had one of 20,000 votes in Pennsylvania alone. So that's take away 20 from Trump and add 20 to Biden.
Yeah, and let's just break that down again for all of our viewers, Joe. I mean, we're talking about, there was in Antrim County, Michigan. They said that there was a glitch that it was something like 2,600, 2,700 votes to Biden. Those actually should have been votes for Trump. So you're talking about a 5,000 to 6,000 vote switch. That was one issue. And then the other issue you're talking about here is these are citizens who are actually watching and sometimes filming and recording the real-time feed of voter data that's coming in that CNN and others are putting out, where they're showing in real time these numbers switching, where it's got Trump ahead and then the exact same number of votes suddenly switches to Biden. I just wanted to lay out that those are two separate issues that we're talking about.
That's right. And it's great. The citizen journalist is wonderful, as well as all these brilliant people around this great country. Right. And I'll kind of introduce you to a couple of those here in a moment. So we saw this thing that was happening, and then we found about our seventh one, and I wrote up a post, and this one was in Michigan or in Wisconsin, and we said, if this one's accurate, this would flip the state back to Trump, because at that time I think Trump's down by about 20,000 votes. This thing would make it almost even. 9,000 some votes taken away from Biden, moved back to the Trump column, and we've got pretty much an even race in Wisconsin. So now we're kind of talking about this stuff's impactful, And so the one observation I made in that post was, then this was about Wisconsin, and I shared all the prior glitches that these were being called, and I said the one common factor to all these is they're always against Trump. Right. He's never gaining the votes. It's always Biden who is. So we are seeing a pattern here, and the pattern is it's against Trump.
And let's just pause on that for a minute, Joe, because a lot of times, the mainstream media and others have been saying, well, there was an error, there was a glitch. But the preponderance of all of these errors are always in favor of Biden and against Trump, whether you're talking about this software glitch in Antrim County, Michigan, or you're talking about a place like Georgia where there were uncounted ballots that actually favored Trump. All of these errors, time and time again, are errors that actually favored President, should have favored President Trump, but the error favored Vice President Biden. I just think it's a really important point. They say, well, this was an error, this was an error, this was an error. But strangely, all of these errors went in one direction, and that was supporting Vice President Biden.
That's right. And so kind of our next question, as we're seeing this, and this is really only happening over a couple week and a half period since the election, is it'd be nice to get our hands on a data set. Wouldn't it be nice to really scour through that like I could do in the old days in auditing, et cetera? And sure enough, the next day, a guy who sent me information in the past said, hey, take a look at this stuff, Joe. And it came, and he linked me to this group called The Donald. They've got a website. I think that's their name, thedonald.com. I think so. if you Google it, I'm sure you can find them. And it's this group of young IT guys that had a whole group on, I believe it was Reddit, in the 2016 election. And Reddit doesn't like Trump, so they kicked him off, even though I think it was maybe one of their biggest groups. And so they went and set up their own website. And these young IT guys that like Trump, which are just great people to be around, they got a hold of the data set. So of all things, in some time, maybe in history, we'll look back and say, thank you, New York Times, for your find, because this data set comes from the New York Times. So they got a hold of it, and what it is it's all the transactions for the presidential race only, from the election up through even a couple days in some cases after the election, for every state. So now we've got a data set that shows every single entry for every state as it was reported online. So when those numbers came into CNN, they were being fed by this stream of data that's flowing, that went to all big media, all the media companies. And these guys got a hold of that. And now it's all over the net.
And Joe, let's just pause for all of our viewers here.
Sure.
This is the stream of data. When people are watching, let's say they're watching on Fox or Real America's Voice or CNN, but they're seeing those updates where it says 36% reported, 42% reported, 43% reported, and it's showing the real-time numbers. This is the raw data that's coming into the media, and you guys got your hands on that raw data that was given to the media.
We got it through this group called the Donald. And they got it, and there's some sharp guys on their site. And I talked to one guy, I said, there's about 200 of us that dug into this data. They started going after it. And what they found was that there was roughly, I think, 700,000 votes that they could see that switched from Trump to Biden across the country in this election data set. That's what they identified. They also identified another 2 million to 2.5 votes that just disappeared.
Wow.
Roughly from the Trump column. So roughly we had about 3 million votes that these guys are saying either switched from Trump to Biden or just disappeared, which people think probably went to Biden. So that was like, whoa, this is huge. And I put it up in a post. We hadn't audited it, and I mentioned that. And still to this day, I haven't fully audited it. But it's amazing. People are coming out of the woodwork saying, "Hey, Joe, how can we help?" Got some great professionals that have sent us some stuff. One guy volunteered to start looking at it, and then he and I got distracted on another exercise. But so I can't say this is audited numbers, but it's big numbers, and so it's huge. Anyways, the next day President Trump tweets out in all bold letters, "Hey, here's what's happening. Millions of votes," and you could tell, wow, he read that was our article.
Yeah.
Then the next day he actually retweeted the article as well. So real exciting when the president retweets your work. But that was just almost maybe the beginning here, but what happened there. So any thoughts or questions on any of that?
No, that's making sense. And in fact, Joe, one thing we might do here is we're just going to take a 10-second break for a quick tech check, and then we will come right back to you. Folks, stay right with us. Okay, now, Joe, you were saying just before we took that quick break, go ahead, sir, and finish your thought there.
Well, so really the point was that we had uncovered this big data set and that some guys had looked at it, and that this was their analysis. So pretty exciting stuff. So
yeah.
So what happened next was somebody that I know is an extremely sharp professional reached out to me and provided me some information on the election, something else. And in this case, what he gave me was an analysis of Pennsylvania. And so now we're about 10 days after the election. The data in Pennsylvania is now out there on the internet, and they show by county the number of votes that came in on election day for both candidates, Trump and Biden, and actually the other candidates too, I believe. And then the number of votes that came in through mail-in the mail-in ballots. And so some observations on that are this, but I'm sorry, maybe I should step back and make an observation about that data set that we talked about.
Sure, go ahead, Joe. Yeah.
The one thing that is wild is this data set comes in, and it doesn't have number of votes per candidate. It has a percent. You're like, if in every election I was ever involved in, or whatever, you would count the votes and count the other person's votes, and the person with the most votes wins. But in this case, they send a percentage for each candidate and a total number of votes at that period of time. And that's basically the data set that New York Times and all these companies are getting every election.
And if I can, let me break that down again for folks, because what that means is that they're assigning a percentage, but the total number of votes that are coming in that data set actually shows decimals. So it would show, for example, that Joe Biden got 40.128 votes.
That's right.
Right? And it should be an integer, right? It should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 45, 4,500. Yeah. But you shouldn't be getting 7,823.678 votes. In our system, you get votes, one at a time. Right. But you're saying that the data set actually showed these decimals.
That's right, because they're using these percentages. And so you're like, you scratch your head a little bit. It's like, boy, that looks a bit odd. You know what I mean? Okay, let's move on. But boy, that's odd. So I'll just pause on that, because that is something we identified some things with that later. But what we identified next before that is what I was talking about with Pennsylvania. They have this data set out there, and they show every vote or every county and the number of votes for Trump and Biden, and whether they came in on election day or through the mail.
Right.
And in that exercise, you can see Trump crushed Biden on election day, about 2-1.
Right.
It was like 60-30. He destroyed Biden. Some of these counties, the results were 80% for Trump, 20% for Biden. Just an incredible showing. And at the end of that day, they had counted about 75% of their votes. And here's Trump up by 700,000 on election night. 2 million to whatever Biden had. It was a bloodbath. And it was and based upon numbers of people at events, it was pretty reasonable, really. And but then they started counting their mail-in ballots, and this process occurred some that day, and then others days after that. And slowly we saw these votes change, and over time, and what happened eventually is through those mail-in ballot counts, Biden catches up to Trump and goes ahead. What we identified in the data set that this provided in Pennsylvania, though, is that in almost every case in almost every county, out of, I can't remember, 50 to 100 counties in Pennsylvania, when there was a relationship or a pattern that occurred, again, we're seeing a pattern. So like in the first case, it was a pattern. It was always against Trump. Now we're seeing a pattern here that was really unique. In every county where Trump won, there was a 40% difference between his win for election day votes versus mail-in. So I can explain it this way. If a county got 80% of the vote on election day to Biden's 20%, Trump wants 80%. When in the mail-in vote, Trump got only 40%, or 40% less of that 80%. In the next county, if Trump won by 70% on election day, that county, ironically, the mail-in votes, Trump only won 30% of those. The rest went to Biden, and so on. So in almost every county, we see this 40% difference. And that's not natural. That's not random. That looks like a pattern. And what we're seeing and believing is that patterns are not good. There's something that smells here, and that's what we saw there. So I could pause for a moment. Any kind of questions on that?
Yeah, so let's just explain that again to our viewers. So let's say that there were 10 counties, and if Trump won on election day 80%, 70%, 60%, and 50%, you're saying that the mail-in ballots then followed this pattern where Trump won 40%, 30%, 20% and 10% of the mail-in ballots, that they followed this kind of mathematical pattern, which is very odd. And I believe you guys did an analysis that showed that in other states, I think you looked at Arkansas specifically, it was highly irregular, that you didn't have anything like that kind of mathematical, correlation or relationship between the in-person voting and the mail-in voting. So this again looked to you to be very, very strange.
It certainly stands out. And also in like Arkansas, what we saw is the worst that Trump ever got in a county, the difference was 40%. Not always. The worst.
Not consistently.
So in some cases, it was very close to what the percentage that he won on election day. And that's really probably what you would think would happen if people.
Yeah, and let's maybe pause on that point for one more moment, Joe, because I think what's important here is that, because there could be some confusion, people would say, well, President Trump got 80% of the vote in this county, but then in another county, in Philadelphia, for example, Biden got 80%. And that would be a natural result that you would expect. But in fact, what you guys found was that in that same county where Trump got 80% on election day, that the mail-in ballots had him only getting 40%. So you're talking about you're comparing the county in person to the county versus in the mail-in votes. And that looks strange. And then what you're saying is that it looks strange because that drop-off is the same percentage across all of these counties. Do I have that right?
That's right. That's it.
Yeah.
And it's not normal.
Yeah.
It's just not normal when we look at other states. It's just.
Well, it's not normal when you guys looked at Arkansas, for example, and you put up the graph there that showed that. So I'm sorry. Please continue.
So that was something. And so now we're kind of seeing patterns, and I'm starting to, as Jim and I are talking, we talk a lot. We're talking through this. What happens? But Dr. Shiva from MIT and email fame did a video on YouTube. And in this video, he explained how he also found some patterns with the data. And what he found was that in states, and he looked at 4 counties in Michigan. And he said in each county, and he looked at the precincts in that county. So where people went to vote, you can get those totals in Michigan. And what he found was that the more Republican, or the more red, we'll say the precinct is, unbelievably, it looked like the more, through his theory, the more that deviated from what is expected. So if you had a real Republican county, you would expect the results to be much higher than they were. Even though the results were pro-Trump, they were much lower. And the thing was, this went in, again, almost a line. So as the expected amount gets greater, which is these more red states, the difference gets greater as well. And so a unique perspective of looking at the data, it's using a lot of statistical analysis. This guy's a real sharp guy, but there's this pattern there that he identified in all 4 counties. The difference, again, always against Trump, and per his estimates, the number of votes he thought was probably around 130,000 that were switched between Trump and Biden. So, and I can tell you real simply what he did is he looked at, in Michigan, they've got that you can vote for just the candidate, or you can vote for the whole party. There's 2 different options. And the theory is that in a county where it's really pro-Trump, no matter which method they use to vote, they're probably going to go in the same direction. A Trump county is going to get more Trump votes in both cases. And what he found was that when people individually voted for Trump, that number, instead of being in line with the party-only vote, that number went down. But it was down proportionally. It's not like it's random down, but the more people in a county, percentage-wise, that voted for Trump and or the Republicans in an all party vote, the fewer the people that voted for Trump alone. And this anomaly doesn't make sense, and based on history and historical analysis. And so he could measure that, and it always went down, but it was always at a line. So very unique analysis. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, let's keep
Okay,
going. Let's
so
keep going. So he shared that
yeah,
with you.
another pattern. So we put that up in a post. And then the next day, we actually attempted to use his exercise in Milwaukee, where we saw a lot of shenanigans going on election night. There's some things that didn't make sense. Their initial reporting were precincts with more voters or more votes than voters and things like that. So now they've cleaned it up. They came out with an adjusted report now through one of the newspapers there in Milwaukee that says, oh no, there was no county or precinct where there was more people voting than voters, but who knows what's going on there. And so the president now is doing a recount there. But anyways, we tried it in Milwaukee, and the same thing. We got the same pattern that Dr. Shiva did. The guy, Dr. Shiva, by the way, is acclaimed for inventing the email. It's a sharp guy. And so anyways, we found the same pattern. So now we've got like 3 episodes of patterns along with this big block. So next what popped up was something else unusual. As we were looking through the data, one thing we started to find, and we first found this in Michigan and Virginia, of all places, that when you look at the data that came in and start looking at all these numbers, and what you could see, especially I'll give the example of Virginia, Trump was crushing it in Virginia. Trump was crushing it everywhere. He did really well. He broke Obama's record, remember, by 4 million votes. Now, it was big.
Right.
And so Trump in Virginia is crushing it, and he's got about a 52 to 46%, 45% vote with at least 50% of the votes in. I mean, he's just way ahead. And so what we saw then was in the middle of the night, and we're seeing this now in 5 states, all of a sudden there's some big entries, big vote totals that get dumped. And in Virginia, some real unique things happen. And then after those dumps occurred, every single entry for votes after that point in time, again, has the same pattern, and it's percentage of Biden, 51%. In Virginia, it was like 51%. Percentage for Trump, 49%, for every single entry after that point. Which again.
So again, let's just break that down for our viewers. So you know, if in theory, let's make the number simple. President Trump had 100 votes and Joe Biden had 90 votes. What happened was you guys saw in the middle of the night a dump of 20 votes, puts Biden up 110 to Trump's 100. But then every single batch of votes after that has the exact same percentage of Biden votes versus Trump votes, which again is not just it is historically, statistically anomalous and almost mathematically impossible that every batch of votes would come in with the exact same distribution, 51-49, 50.5, 49.5. So again, you saw in the middle of the night this big drop of votes come in. Those put Biden ahead, and then every entry that you see after that shows this exact same breakdown, 51, 49, et cetera.
Doesn't make sense. You know what I mean? Statistically almost impossible. And so, but the other thing I'd point out with Virginia was in the middle of the night, these big dumps. What we saw at one point, and this is the accountant in me talking, 300,000 votes come in for Biden, 30,000 for Trump. 90 to 10 difference. Massive drop. All of a sudden, that entry, almost the same amounts are reversed. They're taken out in negative votes of 300,000. A few moments or minutes or maybe even half an hour later, another similar entry, 300,000 votes for Biden, 30,000 for Trump. A short time after that, they reversed that entry. So for me, and then actually one more time, they entered 300,000 votes for Biden, 30,000 for Trump. So the net was 300,000 votes for Biden, about 30,000 for Trump, but 90% of the votes going to Biden. And in total, 5 massive entries, in and out and in and out. To me, the accountant in me says they screwed up on the amount. They had to reverse it, popped it back in, screwed up again, had to reverse it, and then they popped it in again. And that's what accountants sometimes will do. They put in the wrong entry by error.
They put in the wrong entry, they reverse it, and then they put in another.
Yeah, in this case, that's what it looked like, but massive amounts of dumps. So that doesn't make sense because, again, 300,000 people didn't go into the ballot place and say, hey, I want to take my vote back. And they didn't do that 2 times, you know?
And to date, no one has explained why they put in these entries and then actually reverse them. Is that right?
That's right. And here's the other kind of a similarity with the other states we've looked at. Happens in the middle of the night, happens at about the point where 90% of the vote's in, and at that point, Biden locks in the lead. And then from that point on, every entry's 51-49 or whatever it is for the state for Biden. So you can't, Trump's not going to pass it.
Now, Joe, we only have probably about a couple, just maybe 90 seconds left or so. If you could just bring folks up to date here. You've done this analysis, you've published these numbers, and then just today, Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, Jenna Ellis, Joseph DeGeneva, Trump's legal team went out, and they actually cited your numbers in the press conference. If you could just, in 30 seconds or so, give our viewers a sense for what happened today.
Okay, so great. And I'm not sure that they cited our numbers, but they certainly are talking about the same theory. Within the machines is where it's at. And within the Dominion voting machines, and we're hearing a lot about them, but there was data manipulation. And we've got information, as a matter of fact, we found today somebody on the internet, another brilliant guy in the country has identified, here's how it works. He developed a script against this New York Times data and can figure out how it happened. What they were doing was they were moving votes from Trump, and sometimes directly to Biden, sometimes through the third party, and then to Biden. And that's why you think about on election day, you never saw the third party vote. But if you would have seen votes coming in and out that wouldn't have made sense. But that appears to be what happened. And so they were moving hundreds of thousands of votes from Trump to Biden. And that's consistent with what we've seen. It's consistent with the patterns we've seen. And as far as that Virginia, we did that in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Georgia, and Michigan. Same thing. Middle of the night, once 90%, boom, all of a sudden, from that point on, it's Biden's.
Yeah. And the last point I'll make on this, Joe, is that you guys have found this, and you found that it happened only in these battleground states. You don't have giant dumps of 130,000, 150,000 votes in Texas or in Florida. This is only happening in those battleground states where Trump was ahead and then was overtaken by Biden.
That's right. There may be evidence that now it happened almost everywhere. So we're looking into that.
Interesting.
So
awesome. Well, Joe, we certainly appreciate you and the whole team kind of digging into these numbers and joining us to explain it to all of our viewers. We look forward to staying in touch with you, and we appreciate you continuing your analysis, folks. Again, that's Joe Hoft. He and Jim Hoft are over at the Gateway Pundit, and they're joining us today to break down what they've found in their latest numbers. Joe, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, Eric. Great to be.
You bet. Thank you.